All right, I love the 80s, and we are in the 80s now. This is the resurgence of conservatism, and we are looking at Ronald Reagan. So let's just take a brief encounter at looking at the basic differences between conservatism and liberalism. And then, of course, you can see right here, political ideology that mistrusts the federal government power. That would be conservatism. They don't believe that the power should be in Washington, D.C., but should be in your hands in the state or city in which you live. Support the original intent of the Constitution and the separation of powers. The belief in free enterprise, which means that you can start a business, you can do it. You do not have to work for the government like under communism in order to make our country great. You can do it yourself if you want to go out there and do that and make money and employ people. They would encourage that. They oppose high taxes and government programs that arrest the growth of the people, so they don't want you to become a slave to the government and the money that the government might hand over. This is not merely social, it's financial. So liberalism, a belief that government should regulate or control the lives of the people, so that you should be able to get everything off of the government and not from yourself or your own initiative. Typically believe that greater taxes are necessary to do this. Obviously, you need money to pay for these programs, and that's how you get it. So conservatism and the Cold War. After years of recession, Americans were concerned that liberal economic ideals were sending the United States towards communism, which is government-controlled industry. So conservatives wanted to stop this and allow individuals to control the businesses. Also, a weak foreign policy of Democrats, that would have been Carter, and you can see it to the right, and the spread of Soviet power made Americans want a strong foreign policy of the conservatives. Liberals were thought to reject religion as well. So, and that's because communism actually rejects religion also. They would be atheists. Conservatives organized. William Buckley founded a magazine called the National Review that wrote to revive the party. This started the push towards the movement and the mainstream and conservatism into the mainstream. So as you can see in this slide, you can see that the conservatism movement starts to gain support, and basically in these two areas of the Sun Belt. But we're going to say the rise of the Sun Belt is the Southern conservatives were Democrats, while the West were Republicans. Remember, we talked about how the Southern Democrats were the ones that supported segregation, and so that's the areas that were still Democrats during this time. People started to move west or south for their jobs and where the weather was nice, so that's why it's called the Sun Belt, versus the Rust Belt, which is up around Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, those areas. Sun Belt conservatism. The Northeast was a large with industry, but industry began to decline as steel and car manufacturing went to Asia. These areas became known as the Rust Belt. The idea that the federal government was becoming too strong spoke to Southern Democrats who wanted them to stay out of their business. The Sun Belt opposed high taxes. Suburban conservatism, we're going to go skip that and go to the religious right. This is a social conservative view. So not financial, even though it gets attached to republicanism or Republicans or conservatism. It's just basically a piece of the social aspect. After abortion was legalized and women began to work, not that conservatives felt working women were bad. It was the removal of a stable person in the home that they didn't like. With the birth of TV, evangelist preachers began to use this as a way of spreading their message. They were called televangelists, like Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, and Billy Graham. Unfortunately, some of these people were actually unscrupulous and took money from unsuspecting people that thought they were giving money to good causes. Not all of them, but yes, many of them. A new coalition. In the 1970s, there was high unemployment, high taxes, no faith in government, riots, crime, drug abuse. Americans wanted a change from these problems, and Ronald Reagan offered something you are familiar with, and that is the word hope. Probably change as well. So under the Reagan years, what we have here are the road to the White House. Ronald Reagan, a former Hollywood actor and the governor of California, believed in self-reliance and independence and that people should save themselves. So believe it or not, he used to be a Democrat. And then over the time and positions he held in Hollywood in the Actors Guild, he changed his mind about that. So moving to conservatism, he, as it says, he supported FDR, but in dealing with communism, by the 1964, he had become a national speaker, which by 1966 helped him to win the governor's election in California. The election of 1980, cut taxes, increase defense. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? The answer was no, and he won by 51%. Reaganomics. So you go ahead and look over there to the right under Reaganomics, and you can see what that is, the combination of Reagan and economics. See the diagram. And so you can see that it's high interest rates and lower taxes trickle down economics. So what they're saying is if you take care of the people that are in the upper middle class and the upper class, that they then generate jobs for the lower class. Working people are always better than people that are just living off the government and idle. Cutting programs. With the 25% tax cut, programs needed to be eliminated. Don't spend more than you make. Government is still learning this lesson. Who knows when they actually will? This is the idea of balancing a budget. He tried to reduce spending on school lunch, Medicare, welfare, student loans, housing subsidies, which subsidies means that they pay for your rent. Like if your rent's $1,000 and the government covers $800 and you only have to pay $200. And unemployment. Deregulation. To drive prices on items down because of government regulations, which are rules, he removed those rules that are called regulation. You, the consumer, must pay for these rules in the form of high taxes on items. So removing those regulations can open up new markets and it could hurt the environment. Depends on the regulation and your perspective on whether or not it actually does hurt the environment or not. Now, one of the things, and this probably sounds true in the most recent election, was that Reagan dealt with the Supreme Court. And I know that at your age you might not understand the power of the Supreme Court, but these individuals are elected for a lifetime. They do not have a term limit. They do not have an ability to leave office except for death or some sort of, infirmity. So the economy booms. In 1983, the economy began to recover. By 84, the U.S. had the biggest economic expansion in history. Income climbed 15%. 5 million new businesses were created, 20 million new jobs, and unemployment falls to 5.5% nationally. Honestly, in Las Vegas, it was much smaller. Shifting the judicial balance. Just as in the 2016 election, the nomination of new justices was an important aspect of the conservative movement. Reagan nominated the first female to the Supreme Court named Sandra Day O'Connor. She retired in 2006, but her picture is there for you to see. He also named Anton Scalia, who just recently died, and that became the topic of this most recent election as his spot. Reagan also named Anthony Kennedy, who is still on there today. Remember, these people are elected for life. Reagan wins the election again in 1984. In 2014, Reagan easily, that should really not say that. That should really say in 1984 with 59%. Sorry about that. Peace through strength. Reagan spent $1.5 trillion. You can see what that looks like down there because that is a huge number and we probably can't comprehend it on the military. Reagan felt that the Soviets could not build up their military because their communist system of economy was just ruined. He wanted to pay for this with budget cuts, but because Congress did not allow that to happen, the money was not there. This pushed the deficit higher, which is like the debt. Thus, Reagan's foreign policy of peace through strength and military weapons was formed. There were hostile instances during these Reagan years. The Reagan doctrine to build up the military and support guerrilla forces against communist governments, that actually played out in some of these places. For the Afghan rebels in 1979, the USSR had invaded Afghanistan. Jimmy Carter gave $30 million to the rebels to defeat the Soviets, but Reagan gave $570 million. Like Vietnam, there was no clear winner. But the USSR left in 1988. And then there's Nicaragua and Grenada, or Grenada, however you want to say it, tomato. Nicaragua conflicts also began during the Carter administration. The rebels were called Sandinistas, but they were two bad guys that Carter wanted to remove because they were socialists. Reagan began to arm the Contras, the anti-Sandinistas. In Grenada, Reagan sent troops and defeated the communist government. So you guys can see some of these places in the map below because they seem so far away and just foreign words I'm saying, but you can see them there. Then there was the Iran-Contra scandal. This was a black mark on his presidency. Congress had denied money to the Contras, but Reagan's staff continued to support them. So weapons were sold to Iran, released the American hostages, the dollars profits, and then it went to the Contras. So it was like a backdoor way of giving the Contras money. Oh, like I said, Marine Colonel Oliver North testified to covering up their actions by shredding documents to destroy evidence. So we also had a new approach to arms control. Arms are nuclear weapons. So nuclear arms or weapons were placed in Western Europe. That would be those areas, not in Eastern Europe. Haha. With this move, protests began, which led to the start of strategic arms reduction talks. Star Wars. No, not the movie. Reagan did not believe in mutual assured destruction and felt it was immoral because it depended on killing massive numbers of people. Thus, he began Strategic Defense Initiative, also called Star Wars, which would destroy missiles that were fired on the United States. So basically, it was like satellites in the air that would shoot down the weapons that were coming at us. A new Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, became leader of the USSR, which means he's the prime minister, in 1985. He knew that the Soviet economic system was failing. He and Reagan met many times to discuss the arms race and arms reduction. Reagan famously stood on the Berlin Wall, saying to him, General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, tear down this wall. So relations improve. In December 1987, Gorbachev and Reagan signed the INF, Immediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. This began the end of the Cold War, and Gorbachev began to make economic changes in the USSR. And basically, communism was collapsing. So we're on to this slide, and what this is just basically a slide kind of looking at the differences between your ideas of being liberal or conservative, how you feel on some of these issues like healthcare, taxes, even cell phones, believe it or not. Like, do you think the government should pay for your cell phone? And that's something that is close to your heart because you actually have one. You might not pay taxes or any of these other things. So do you think that they should pay for your cell phone? Now remember, this is taxes, so if you do have a job, that means that taxes are going to pay for people even if they don't work for their cell phones. And why would that be a responsibility of the government? Just like if you want to say, why would healthcare be the responsibility of the government, or why would anything in your daily lives, like helmet laws, do they have the right to tell you that you have to wear a helmet to be on a motorcycle? So there's many different things that can go towards the idea of being conservative or liberal with the ideas of what the government controls within your daily life, within your lives. So then there's this kind of perspective to look, and you can see where it's left and right, more government, less government, how the people decide social issues versus economic issues. So you can sit there and stare at that when you download this, and you can see exactly what those perspectives are. And in this lesson, you will take a test, and it will kind of decide some of those or tell you a little bit more about yourself with that. So now we go to section 3, life in the 80s. Recovering from the recession of the 70s helped launch Americans into wealth of the 1980s. Lifestyles of the rich and famous. Dallas and Dynasty all glamorized lives of the rich. People were prosperous because of the changes made by Reagan. Of course, prosperous means making money. The strong economic growth benefited nearly everyone willing to work. Yuppies are those young urban professionals that you can see to the right. It was an attitude and a style of dress. You leave college and move right into paying jobs, and you do well. A retail revolution. A new way of selling products that reduce prices for Americans also came about. Discount retailers, Ross, TJ Maxx, Marshalls, Best Buy, Home Depot, Costco, Sam's Club, Walmart sold many products cheaper and made more money. Sam Walton grew up very poor, but worked hard, 16-hour workdays, and established distribution centers that resupplied his store fast. Arthur Blank also grew up poor, and the same idea and established Home Depot. Then Richard Schultz established Best Buy for consumer electronics. So you can see there's kind of like, if you're poor, you might have a reason to work hard. Over in technology and media, the amount of entrepreneurs, which are people that create businesses that didn't exist before that, transformed the entertainment industry. Ted Turner created TBS channel, CNN, the 24 News channel, and Robert Johnson created BET. He had a degree from Princeton and wanted to promote African American businesses and culture. MTV came on air, it should say, in 1980. And obviously that changed music, because the prettier you are, the better video you had, the better chances you'd actually make money. They had shows like Yo MTV Raps, Headbangers Ball. Instead of DJs, the people were called VJs. Then video games added another layer of entertainment in the 80s. Arcades became places to meet your friends and hang out, challenge each other to Pac-Man. Unfortunately, a society was under stress, and drugs and crimes were on the rise as well. Cocaine use became huge, but cocaine, you can see up there, is a hydrochloric salt in its powder form, while crack cocaine is derived from powdered cocaine, but combined with water and another substance, usually baking soda, which is sodium bicarbonate. After cocaine and baking soda are combined, the mixture is boiled and into solid forms, and it is cheaper, and people would smoke it instead of snorting it, and it became popular in the 80s amongst poorer people, and that increased gang activity on people who wanted to get rich doing this. And then, of course, there was the drug use that required needles, and that helped spread AIDS, which we look at here on this particular slide. And so with the epidemic in 1981, researchers identified a virus of AIDS that attacked a person's immune system, the system that fights off other diseases. Once a person had the disease, their body was unable to fight other germs, and the person would then die from whatever attacked them. So not AIDS. So essentially, if you got AIDS and then cancer attacked you, you couldn't fight the cancer off because the cancer would kill you. Initially, this disease was spreading fastest amongst gay males and was called gay cancer. The actual virus was HIV, which once your T cell count drops to a dangerous levels, you then have AIDS. Gay people may have been the largest group at first, but then Magic Johnson, a heterosexual male, and then females and people that had received blood from other people called transfusions also caught and spread the disease through needles. So artists become activists. There was a widespread famine in Ethiopia from 1983 to 85. We were dropping food over there, but the warlords were keeping the food and holding their own people hostage through famine. The worst famine hit the country in a century in northern Ethiopia. It led to more than 400,000 deaths, but more than half of this mortality can be attributed to human rights abuses that caused the famine to come earlier. Strike harder and extend further than would otherwise have been the case. And so you could see some of these groups that were performing to help raise awareness. Other areas in Ethiopia experienced famine for similar reasons, resulting in tens of thousands of additional deaths. The tragedy took place within the context of more than two decades and the insurgency of civil war. Due to this, music artist Bob Geldof wanted to raise money. He created Band Aid and then Live Aid to bring awareness to funding to these Ethiopians. Not wanting to be outdone, Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones wrote We Are the World to raise money as well. Seeing the success of these groups and needing funding for farmers in the USA, Willie Nelson explained how farmers in the U.S. were facing ruin and raised money to help them with farm aid. So, also in the 80s, very big, of course, was the Shuttle Program. And we were very proud of that as a nation. So first we have to look at Hands Across America, another benefit event, publicity campaign that staged on that particular date, which approximately 6.5 million people held hands in a human chain of 15 minutes across a path of continuous across the United States. Many participated, donated $10 to reserve their place in line. The proceeds were donated to local charities to fight hunger and homelessness and help those in poverty in the U.S. And then the space shuttle. Wouldn't it be great to have a rocket that takes off but lands like a plane? So notice the diagram to the right. NASA thought so too and invented the space shuttle program. April 12, 1989, Columbia launched from Florida. NASA used these shuttles for experiments and to move people and goods to the space stations. Typically, the shuttles would take off from Florida and land in California. Then it would be flown back to Florida or driven back. With this program, risks were necessary. And in January of 1986, Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. You can see that picture there. The country was shocked as we watched over and over the replay of the explosion. 74 seconds into flight, all 6 crew members were killed, including a civilian teacher that was aboard. So now we enter the last section of this chapter, and that is the end of the Cold War, because this was one of the biggest things that it obviously shaped our culture for many years before this. So you see a picture of George H.W. Bush there and Mikhail Gorbachev. And when Reagan left office, life was good. Americans wanted it to continue, and it was natural for them to vote for his vice president, George H.W. Bush. He swore the famous quote, "Read my lips, no new taxes." Unfortunately, he actually did raise taxes, which kind of led to his downfall, but Democrats nominated Michael Dukakis to run against him. In 1988, H.W. wins the presidency. Gorbachev reforms. Okay, so the leader of the USSR, after spending so much money on weapons, the Soviet people were hungry. Communism, which advocates class war and leading to the society which all property is publicly owned. So remember, you don't just get what you want if the government becomes a part of your life. They own a piece of you. Was not working as a form of government, Gorbachev had a two-sided approach for these changes in the USSR that would help bring a better economic system to the people. First, perestroika. It is the restructuring of government, allowing some private enterprise. Remember, before this, the government owned everything. And glasnost, which is an openness of freedom, social freedoms like religion and speech. Revolutions in Eastern Europe. Just like the Arab Spring of your lifetime, the Eastern European countries bound together by the USSR were beginning to loosen. A spreading revolution began in 1989 and started to move through Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Bulgaria, away from communist control. And then look at that picture there. On November 9th, 1989, guards on the Berlin Wall opened the gates. And you can see those pictures of what happened next. And it was amazing. And there's a place in town, I believe it's Main Street Station, where you can see a piece of the wall in the men's bathroom. Of course, that applies to you men. The Soviet Union collapses. Eastern Europe abandoned communism, and Gorbachev was met with opponents at home. In August 1991, there was an overthrow of his government, and he was arrested. He's basically kept in another area of the world. The coup leaders were hardline communists that did not like the changes, perestroika and glasnost, that were being made in the USSR. So this lasted only 2 days, but the USSR was dismantled. And so that picture to the right, you can see what there used to be and then what there was at the end. And Boris Yeltsin, you see a cartoon of him to the right, but then over to the left, you could see him standing holding a sheet of paper. His name really isn't Boris, but the B in Russian, or the letter V in Russian looks like a B. His name is Boris. The president defied the coup leaders and was made prime minister when Gorbachev was losing power. Gorbachev announced the end of the USSR, and you can see the differences of the flags there. So I love the 80s, and so, with loving the 80s, I thought I'd go ahead and add a little pop culture there for you to see, and you can see that pop culture slide with many things that were from the 80s. So if you have to dress up for an 80s night, know that you could go preppy, know that you could go neon, know that you could go big hair. Any of those things are appropriate. Hope you guys have enjoyed this lesson.